Welcome to the At the Coalface podcast with your host, Jason Greenwood. This podcast is all about what it's really like in the trenches of digital and e-commerce. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the At the Coalface podcast with me, Jason Greenwood, your host. And I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming Ryan Murtagh, ex-Neto / Maropost, to the podcast today. Welcome, Ryan.
Thanks for having me, Jason. Great to be here.
Awesome to have you. And look, I guess you and I have known each other, I think it's going back maybe about 5 years, maybe a little bit longer now. We've worked on a few different projects together across the Neto and Bonero platforms, as well as, different migrations out of various different platforms that have been your baby over the years. I'm super stoked to have you here. And what most people, I guess, would probably know you from, or where most people would know you from, is obviously being the founder and CEO of Neto for, I think it was over 12 years. Omnichannel e-commerce platform, founded in Australia. You're an Aussie boy, and recently, earlier in the year, sold Neto to Maropost out of Canada, to integrate into their omni-channel stack. So you're at least from my perspective, very well known in ANZ in the e-commerce and omni-channel space. So yeah, is that how most people would actually know and where you were from?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I started my entrepreneurial journey, I guess you could say, in online retail. I think I built my first website when I was 14 years old, back at school on the local network. So it's been a long journey, 12 plus years with Neto, but well over 20 in the game. So yeah, Neto is probably what I'm most well known for. Neto actually started out of an online department store that I had called bigshop.com.au. And some might remember Big Shop as being the first publicly listed online department store in Australia that went bust when the bubble burst in the early 2000s. And I was lucky enough to acquire the domain name when I came back from studying in France, and kicked off Big Shop, which led to Neto. So yeah, it's been a hell of a ride.
Yeah, and you, as you rightly point out, you owned Uni Supplies 2004 to 2006, head of e-commerce for Ozjet, Inkjet, and Laser Supplies in the early to sort of more early 2010s, 2003 to 2006. So yeah, I guess you have that deep appreciation and respect for omnichannel commerce that you go back. You have pretty much the similar length of time in the industry that I have. So I guess we've got a few gray hairs, based on our experience and time in the industry, which is, there's not a lot of us around, I suppose, that have been around for sort of 20 plus years. And so we've seen the evolution of e-com and omnichannel happen, particularly across ANZ, and it has been an exciting evolution to be a part of and play a part in. But as you rightly point out, it feels very much like Neto was a scratch and itch moment for you.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we were really struggling to scale our business with the software that was available at the time. And I'm talking about, back then it was basically OS commerce. This is what everyone was using, right? And customizing it to their heart's content until it fell over, as were we. And really, we were just struggling to scale, not from the front end so much, but really the back end operations. And I think we were really a pioneer in the multi-channel e-commerce space, and that, we were leveraging marketplaces like eBay, but then we also had a very strong channel ourselves, our own direct channel, and we were trying to integrate those into one operating system. Managing the inventory and fulfillment for both was bloody hard. There were some companies in the US trying to do it. I think NetSuite was one. They had some integrations into marketplace at the time. Obviously, they offer a more robust back-end solution, but it really wasn't localized, at least for the Australian market. And so we had to sort of build it ourselves. And we were fortunate that we had a business that could be our first customer and sustain that build. And I guess the rest is history.
And I guess also first, one of the first cabs off the rank in terms of omni-channel, multi-tenant SaaS platforms as well. I mean, obviously there's Sin7, which was built out of New Zealand, which is also a SaaS platform, has some similarities to Neto in terms of being, aspiring to be a SaaS omnichannel platform. And they had, I guess, a similar development roadmap to you guys, and you guys were sort of competing in tandem in the marketplace. But, you both took the distinct approach of not incorporating financials into your platform. So whilst you, I guess, built out this platform to have elements of OMS, order management, WMS, warehouse management, inventory management, obviously all of the sales channels being integrated back into that centralized platform. Neto always offered, a pretty robust sort of almost like a PIM system, product information management system, where you could, manage all the variants and the parentage and the product model and the attributes and everything else. And you can manage that on a per channel basis as well. So I guess from the earliest days, it sounds very much like you had this idea of, hey, we don't want to be an ERP, but we want to stop just short of ERP land. Meaning we don't want to own all the financials operations of a business, but we want to own all the omni-channel operations of the business. Was that really the vision right from day one for the platform?
Yeah, I guess so. But also, we wanted to be able to leverage those accounting platforms, those financial solutions from a partnerships perspective, especially in the early days in terms of acquiring our first and early customers. But yeah, definitely didn't ever want to go as deep as, a financial management system or an accounting solution. I guess you could say almost like the best bits of ERP, but delivered in a more simplistic, unified way for a specific segment, that being retailers and wholesalers that sell online. But yeah, from the start, our focus has very much been, like you say, those back office operations of an e-commerce business. And it's what has always set us apart from the likes of BigCommerce, Magento, Shopify. And unfortunately, in many ways, it's been hard to articulate that differentiation, right? People always compare us to a Shopify or to a BigCommerce, but the reality is we're fundamentally a different solution. And the value in Neto, isn't the fact that you can build, a rich front end experience, but it's really what we can do for you in the back office of your business, and that we can, optimize and streamline those back office operations from, purchasing stock right through to fulfilling it across any channel. And I think my vision has always been that sale channels are going to completely and have, change over time, and we can't be in control of that. But one thing that I know will always exist is the need to efficiently and effectively purchase stock and fulfill it. And we want to enable merchants to be agnostic to the sales channel and be able to adopt, new sales channels as quickly and efficiently as possible. And that's definitely been the focus since the start, especially given that, from day one, we were one of those merchants that was selling through multiple channels. And in fact, we now have a number of, merchants that use Shopify as a front end, but then Neto as a back end solution.
I was actually just to bring that up, and I guess that was going to be one of my follow-on questions. Was that really part of the motivation for splitting out the back end and sort of creating an own brand around just the operational systems of the platform in Banero, which is really kind of all of Neto minus the front end sales layer, the e-commerce front end sales layer, and you guys, always had pretty robust integrations with Shopify, BigCommerce, Magento, and a couple of others front ends. Was that really a recognition by you guys that, hey, we have a really robust back end, a really robust omni-channel back end that we think merchants can benefit from, regardless of whether they choose to run a Shopify, BigCommerce, and Magento, whatever on the front end? We believe we can bring some omni-channel firepower to the back end that's going to streamline operations, give them the bedrock of operations that they can onboard pretty quickly into their business without having to go down the full implementation route of a full-blown ERP.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, obviously having the front end yourself or the shopping cart, it really cannibalizes the opportunity in those channels. And I think, we wanted to be able to swim in these channels versus, against them all the time. And, these are very large, established brands now with huge customer bases, and it's not an easy switch, right? And unfortunately, like it or not, Neto has predominantly been a switch sell for us, and that's, someone doesn't typically start on a platform like Neto because the value that we add in back-end optimization isn't really needed or realized by a business until they get to a certain scale. So ultimately, they've grown to that scale on a Shopify or on a BigCommerce or an open source solution. They realize they've got this problem. They want to utilize Neto either to grow revenue through new channels by adding Amazon, eBay, MyDeal, Catch, whatever. And they want to optimize their back office by streamlining order fulfillment and inventory. But they need a switch, right? And often these businesses have invested tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars into their front-end experience, into their SEO, and it's a hard switch. We make it as easy as possible, and it's actually relatively seamless, but it is a switch sell, which is always a harder sell. So if we could, bolt into these solutions, add that same value in terms of growing revenue, optimizing back office operations without someone having to switch out their front end, then that's a win-win. And I think we also had to realize that, you can't be the best at everything. And if there's any mistake that I made with Neto, it was that we went too broad too early. And then we had to sort of consolidate our focus later, which is always harder, right? You've always got a lot of tech debt that you have to then manage, and you can't move as fast. So yeah, there's been this sort of real focus to consolidate our product, consolidate our target market, and really own an area. And that's, like I say, because of the future of commerce, being so agnostic to the sales channel, the back end just made the most sense and has made the most sense. And I think what we're seeing now too, with the explosion in e-commerce over the last 18 months, is this now realization that the back end's bloody important, right? There's a real need, especially in the SMB segment, mid-market segment, to better optimize the supply chain and the fulfillment side of these e-commerce businesses, and a huge opportunity for platforms like Maropost, what is now Maropost Commerce Cloud or Neto.
And I guess one example of that breadth of platform that you were referring to is something that I always saw as a standout piece of the platform that I guess unless you're deep in the industry, you wouldn't necessarily understand the complexity of some of the things that you built out with Neto. And I'm thinking specifically of the back-end integration with the major carriers in ANZ, the freight carriers. And so typically what most e-commerce brands will do is they will take up a shipping aggregator, an integration service like a Shipit or a Starshipit, have all of their freighting rules in there, have their real-time carrier rates flowing through those platforms back into e-com, and then the cart information sent to those platforms for a freight calculation if there is a real-time rate requirement. Whereas you guys in the back end, you guys had all of that logic built into the one platform. And so you guys had to build and maintain, you had to build and maintain not only the freight rules engine, but also the integration with the carrier APIs as well.
Yeah. And I mean, you got to remember when we started this, so say 2007, really, when we were building the technology for that part of the platform, 2009 when it started to be sold, and 2011 when we made it a SaaS platform. But back then, APIs didn't exist with these carriers. So we effectively had to replicate what they were doing in their own solutions in our platform. And we first integrated with Australia Post eParcel, and that was back then, right? So we were manually creating and replicating the shipping labels, manually submitting manifests by FTP to Australia Post servers, right? So pretty crazy when you think about it. But yeah, since the start, since day one, we offered shipping labeling, and then just grew the number of carriers on the platform since then. And since then, like you say, a number of services have since evolved, right? And you've got the likes of Shipit, but then there's also these shipping APIs that just make it a lot easier for you to leverage freight carriers within your platform, whether it be an e-commerce platform or a fulfillment platform or whatever. But yeah, we've been doing that since the start, and it has been a big part of our success, and it's always been a big differentiator for us. I think we were I could say almost definitely were the world's first e-commerce platform to offer integrated freight labeling.
Yeah, and I guess it goes way beyond just freight labeling. I mean, it's carrier rules, it's carrier specific rules. It's also SKU specific rules. So if you've got multi-cartons, inside the Neto platform, with the the volumetric weight of a product is, because you know the dimensions, you know the physical weight of the product, you know the composition of the cart on the front end, regardless of whether it comes from your front end or a different front end. So I guess in terms of that, if you were doing that as early as 2007, 2008, 2009, that was, about as cutting edge as it gets for an e-com platform at that point.
Yeah, and I think that's where the breadth of our platform was an advantage in the sense that, you really need to be that PIM or own that product information. You need to really own the order management side of the application and the fulfillment to be able to deliver that experience for merchants. And it is a unique part of our platform, and it is a big differentiator. And it's something that enables our merchants to differentiate themselves at the front end as well, in terms of being able to offer, customers really competitive freight rates, especially in regional Australia, where other platforms don't give you that flexibility to create really complex matrices to ultimately deliver a better experience for their end customers. It's also been really good for us in the B2B or wholesale space, where obviously margins are very tight and the calculation of freight is critically important and almost always paid by the customer and not something that the merchant is actually consuming as a cost. So again, a hugely complex but valuable part of our application. And I think another part that I've always seen as something that's a core competency, but also a huge opportunity, especially into the future for this platform, is the order fulfillment capability that we have, mobile pick and pack, inventory management, etc. From a mobile device for an SMB, that's bringing really enterprise grade capability to a small to medium sized business at a fraction of the cost and complexity. And I think, another huge untapped opportunity.
Absolutely. And how did you, from the earliest days, and what I've found to be very true almost universally in the omnichannel space, is that product companies make terrible professional and managed services business. But most product companies, especially early, they have to seed the market with their platform, right? And so that means that, when they're very early, they can't take on partners because they're an unknown quantity. And so what they have to do is they have to do everything. They got to onboard the client into the platform. They got to do the design, the development. In your case, because you're taking care of the front end and the back end, you had to onboard customers into the front end. You get to do the design. Now, obviously today you've got, partners in Australia like Zealous and a few others that sort of are the partner, the delivery partner of the platform. And you've got other people that sort of help deliver and migrate to the back end of the platform. But in those early days, it must have been hard because you guys had to kind of do the design, the development, the deployment, the migration. You guys kind of had to do everything to seed the market. So how did you navigate what is a really challenging thing as a business to be both a product company and a professional services business?
Yeah, well, you're right. You're 100% correct. We were this sort of hybrid, right, where we were operating as an agency, web design agency specifically for e-commerce, but then also had the SaaS product on the side. And in the early days, it was, I guess, viewed as one of our core competencies, right? And the fact that we could compete with the likes of, say, Shopify and BigCommerce by being that single throat to choke for our customers. Whereas on those platforms, you typically have always had to leverage an agency to deliver, say, for example, your website front end templates. Whereas with us, from the start, we always had that option to have your site designed by our in-house design team. However, although it might have been viewed as a benefit for us and our customers, and that we could deliver this, fully packaged service, it ultimately cannibalized that channel in terms of it being a channel that we could leverage to grow our business. So it was, in hindsight, probably not a great decision to grow that professional services division to how big it eventually became, which was, pretty large for us, and that it did cannibalize the partner channel and delay us really activating that channel. As you've said, we now do have a fairly strong partner channel. We don't offer any professional services ourselves anymore. And that channel now delivers a good percentage of all new customer acquisition. But it was tough in the days that we did. I mean, anyone that's in that game will tell you that running a profitable, especially back then, agency is not easy, especially when you're just leveraging it for people to ultimately use the software. How did we do it? At scale, we ultimately had a team here onshore in Australia, but then we also had a team over in Manila to make it a far more cost-effective operation for ourselves. We built a lot of internal tooling. We built a lot of base templates and components. So although we were delivering bespoke or custom, e-commerce websites, they were all sort of built from a base template and set of components that were then put together to deliver a custom experience on a client-by-client basis. But we got very good at, I think, scoping and quoting. That was critically important to minimize the likelihood of scope creep in a project. We got very good at building tools and systems for enabling customers to approve or to amend designs through the process. And I guess and this is probably a really important one, we were always very opinionated around what good e-commerce site design is. Unfortunately, a lot of merchants or customers have a view on what their site should look like and how it should operate. And ultimately, that's coming from a place that isn't as experienced as ours. And I think we built a culture of being, very opinionated on what a good e-commerce website is and how it should operate. And that, I think that culture definitely helped to deliver projects on time and ultimately websites that sold more product. But yeah, it's like I say, in hindsight, probably something we shouldn't have looked to scale and invest as much as we did in, and probably should have started the partner channel earlier. And I think we would have been in a very different position if we had done that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you face the same challenge that a lot of product companies do is, are we a product company or are we a professional services company? Because it's really difficult to do both really well, because as you pointed out, when you're implementing for clients directly, then you have to have certain developers, obviously the developers that are oftentimes developing the platform also have to do the implementation. So you got front end, back end, full stack developers that are, have to be perhaps in some instances retasked away from continuing to develop the product to do customer implementation. So it is a hard, balance to strike, particularly very early on, where you want to seed the market, you want to get the word out, you want to take on clients, you want to grow your potential market share. But in order to do that, you've got to, kind of seed the market with your own development, your own deployment, your own version control management, and all that sort of thing. So it is a tightrope that you have to walk. Now, one of the things I guess that Neto was always pretty well known for, and I assume it still is the fact that it spans the sort of depth and breadth of not only channels, but also business models. So when I say business models, I'm referring to B2C, D2C, B2B, and, the platform's ability, I guess, to support all of those different go-to-market and pricing models and customer pricing matrices and promotion and discount methodologies and everything else. If you took the full stack of the platform, then obviously once someone authenticates, then they get their exact pricing. They get their own, in some cases, customer group specific promotions. And so I guess right from day one, it feels very much like you had this concept of, hey, we don't want to just be omni-channel. We want to be omni-model, right? And if a business is vertically integrated and it's B2B, B2C, D2C, then we're going to support that. If it's B2B only, we're going to support that. If it's D2C only, we're going to support that. Would that be accurate?
It was at the start, yeah, but it was born out of the fact that a lot of our early customers were B2B customers. And as you know, when you start a new product, you ultimately are building for those early customers. And so they definitely, drove our roadmap and had us build a lot of that, capability that you're talking about. I think another important point was that at the start, and this is back in, 2007, 8, 9, MYOB was the accounting platform of choice for SMBs. They really owned the market back then. Xero didn't exist, and it was really MYOB or nothing, and they had a huge market share. And we had an integration with the MYOB desktop product through their ODBC driver. And ultimately, we mimicked a lot of what existed in MYOB from a customer group, from a price group perspective, so that an MYOB merchant had a seamless experience when they, turned on Neto. So they could replicate that experience that their sales reps were delivering as a B2B business through MYOB, as in, custom pricing using price groups through their online stores. And so a lot of that functionality that you see in Neto related to price groups, related to multi-level pricing, is driven by the structure that MYOB had in place for that business model themselves, which is, now that I say it, and if you jump into a version of MYOB, you'll see it, is where a lot of that was derived from. Having said that, I think that if you focus on that B2B customer, which is a far more complex customer, you ultimately solve for a lot of B2C needs, and you actually give a B2C business a lot more flexibility in what they can do, especially from a loyalty perspective with a consumer, right? And I think over the years, though, we have realized this opportunity in B2B, and probably for the last 2 years, it's been a huge focus of ours from a product roadmap perspective, even from a sales and marketing perspective. You would probably notice that our tagline is really about empowering B2B and multi-channel e-commerce businesses. I don't think we necessarily were winning when we went head to head with a pure play B2C focused business, but we always win, almost always, when we go up against other platforms in the B2B space, or businesses that are multi-channel or marketplace first businesses, just simply because they have these very complex requirements, like you say, around custom pricing and the need to deliver really unique experiences. We also support pretty well, I guess, inventories at scale. So people with hundreds of thousands of SKUs, which is often what you see when you're dealing with that type of business as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, that's why I guess as a consultancy, our consultancy is really heavily focused on that B2B and D2C space, because not only is it blue ocean, but there's so few consultancies that can consult at the level that B2B businesses really require. Whereas most of your B2C businesses, rather, they're so focused on pixel perfect design and the customer journey on the front end, and colors and themes, and they're just so heavily focused on the front end customer experience from a journey perspective and the emotional perspective. Whereas B2B businesses are so much more heavily focused on the operational perspective of their business, because the operational complexity of trying to replicate field sales rep experiences, for example, in an e-commerce website, it's ultra complex, right? And B2B businesses just have that super high standard of complexity that, whether it be from a platform perspective or a consulting perspective, they're just ultra complex. And they've got, long sales cycles, complex sales cycles, sampling, quote requests, quote furnishment, negotiated prices, price lists, customer groups, price groups. There's just so much involved in B2B businesses, even down to their product model in terms of their parent-child relationship. Certain verticals are ultra complex, furniture ultra complex, wine ultra complex. There's so many verticals from a B2B perspective that have unique types of complexity associated with them. I totally agree with you. I think if obviously if you're building an e-commerce platform that can meet all of the operational requirements of a B2B business, your typical B2B business, then by definition, you're also going to meet probably 90 to 95% of the needs of your average B2C business right out of the box.
And it's actually interesting that you mentioned that complexity, but for us, and for me particularly, I really enjoyed that complexity around a B2B business, and I really enjoyed the impact that we could have on a B2B business. And a big part of Neto's culture has been our customer obsession and, effectively building through a customer lens. And I think one thing that always got me out of bed every day, and I know gets, everyone out of bed at Neto, is solving these really complex problems, but, also seeing the impact our software can have on the livelihoods of these businesses. And like I say, in particular, these business to business businesses. And I think I was saying earlier, Neto is traditionally very much a switch sell, and it's a really hard sell. A hard switch when you're trying to take a B2C brand that's invested so much in their front end, like you talk about that pixel perfect design, SEO, et cetera, whereas a B2B business that we're going into typically, they don't even have a front-end experience, but they've got a very established business at the back end that is ripe for innovation, ripe for digitization, ripe for optimization. And it's really cool to see the impact a product like Neto can have on a business like that. Like literally overnight, we can save a business, several employees, or at least have those employees move on to revenue generating activity versus, maybe what was a very manual process, running invoices from a warehouse office down to the warehouse to manually type into freight software for it to be later taken up. It's that whole just convoluted manual process. Being able to go into a business like that, completely transform the business overnight by implementing an all-in-one solution that manages all of that and automates all of that, it's pretty inspirational and definitely definitely motivates the team, which is really important when you're building software. I think to have software that has got such a clear purpose and impact is awesome.
Definitely couldn't agree more. And one of the decisions that it seems like you made early on, and again, this may have just been the nature of the market at the time, because I remember when I first entered into e-commerce, over 20 years ago, as you pointed out, OS Commerce was the platform of the day, and there was lots of customization going on, and it was a spaghetti soup of code. But one of the things, I guess, that you guys made a pretty clear decision on, not only did you choose to be a SaaS platform where the merchant never had to worry about infrastructure and scalability and all the rest, and that was your baby to have to deal with, but you also, and again, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but you made a pretty clear decision early on not to have an app store like the BigCommerces and the Shopifys of the world. And maybe that was just a function of where e-commerce was at the time, but it feels very much like you made the decision, hey, we want to build all of these integrations. We want to build all of this functionality in-house. We want to have it inside the platform. We don't want customers to have to either buy and pay extra, or engage separately with some app vendors or app providers, or build an app framework into our system. That feels like a whole lot of complexity that maybe we don't want to own, even though it may be provide the ability to scale the platform faster, where we don't have to own all the development of it. But then we have the complexity of having an app framework that plugs seamlessly into both the front end and the back end of our platform. So can you talk about maybe some of your thinking internally around not having an app store, or maybe you did have that thinking, or maybe you even do have an app store, but I wasn't aware of Neto ever having sort of that open app framework model that somebody like a Shopify or a BigCommerce had.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a big part of our value prop from day one, like we've been talking about, is the simplification of the tech stack for this specific customer. So bringing together all the core components of commerce into a single solution and owning that, so we can deliver that seamless experience. And that's always been our focus, really ensuring that those pillars of commerce that really matter are owned and working really well together. I wouldn't say that an app store hasn't, been something that we've been wanting to evolve and develop, and we do have an app store. It's just not as rich, I guess you could say, as a BigCommerce or a Shopify app store, and it's not as open. However, for the last year or two, that has been a focus, and it's slowly starting to build out now. I know, when I left, we had over 30 apps in the pipeline. And in the 6 months prior, had released around 20. So it's definitely, now that we truly understand the pillars that we want to own, it's something we're going after, in terms of we now know the gaps that we need to have filled by others, and that's critically important. But yeah, like you say, it hasn't been a focus. Again, hindsight's a wonderful thing. Probably would have put more of a focus on that, so that we could accelerate solutions in these gaps. I think, unfortunately, there has been some circumstances where we've had to, let customers go because we couldn't fulfill a specific need, and we didn't have a framework for others to be able to fulfill that need. And for that particular business, that need was, mission critical for their business operations. A very rare scenario for us, but it has happened. And I think a lot of it just had to do with our focus on really owning the core pillars of commerce before anything else, and really getting those to a stage where we felt that they were working well together, were deep enough before looking down that sort of app store open ecosystem approach, albeit something that's happening now. Absolutely.
Now that makes sense. I mean, when you're splitting, I guess, energy and effort and time and and road mapping against, customer implementations, platform development, framework development for apps. There's a lot to bite off there with a relatively small.
Yeah, and that's right. And we do have and that's what, people need to realize, that we have a relatively small team, or a very small team when you compare us to, the global giants, I guess. And so, like you say, it's just a matter of balancing priorities. And I think I said it earlier, but we're already customer obsessed business, and we've always, built through a customer lens, and, customer requirements, and have always sort of come first. And our customers have always needed us to get to this level of, complexity and depth and the pillars that we focus on. And, we're not even there yet. So yeah, that's just been the focus.
And if we look at the journey from between 2009 and earlier this year in March of 2021, and we chart that journey between, hey, this is a gleam in my eye, I'm scratching an itch, I'm filling a gap in the market that just doesn't seem to be filled by anybody else, and I'm the guy to do it, and I'm going to build a team to help make this happen, all the way through to the Maropost acquisition. And for those that don't know, and embarrassingly, I had never even heard of Maropost until your acquisition, and then looked into who they actually were. Canadian-based company, as far as I'm aware, marketing automation focused platform, similar to your Klaviyo's, your .digitals of the world. So they had marketing automation for e-commerce, absolutely drilled, but didn't have an e-commerce platform, and obviously wanted to build out that capability across the full commerce stack. And how did you, I guess, make the decision, or when did you make the decision? Hey, look, I'm ready to sell. It's my baby, yes, but I want to move on and do other things. And hey, I've got a few options open to me. You obviously knew at the time that there was a lot of money sloshing around in the system. Many platform brands in Australia had gone public, either on the ASX or on one of the American exchanges, as a way to sort of exit their business and get some liquidity into their business and capital into their business. So lots of options open to you in March of 2021. What did that journey look like to actually selling the business?
Yeah, so we started in 2009, really became a SaaS platform in 2011. Up until then, we're really, just effectively building out bespoke solutions from a code base for businesses. 2011 to 2015, we run as a profitable bootstrapped SaaS startup. 2015, Telstra actually approached us to acquire the business, and I sold 50% of the business to Telstra at that stage. 2015 to 2020, Telstra were obviously our major investor and shareholder, and they effectively helped us grow the business between that period. A lot changed though with Telstra's business through that period. A new CEO, in Andy Penn, a new strategy, a real consolidation of focus from them. So really focusing back on being a traditional telco. And there's lots of news that people can read about that in the press, and I'll leave it for your listeners to do. But yeah, I guess, like you said, 2020 was a exceptionally good year for e-commerce, an exceptionally good year for SaaS and technology companies. And I don't know, it had been over a decade that I'd been, operating Neto. I'm an entrepreneur at heart. It's the longest time I've ever spent on anything. And I just felt that the timing was right. We had got it to a stage. We had spoken to a number of potential buyers at that stage. Maropost was introduced to me through a mutual friend of the CEO. And yeah, I just thought that Maropost was a company that could continue the vision that I had. It was a acquisition that meant the platform would continue to be built upon, versus a number of other options that would see it be consumed by a competitor, or other outcomes that wouldn't ultimately have been best for our employees and or our customers. And so that was really important to me. The last thing I wanted to see was our customers negatively impacted through this acquisition. And I thought that, Maropost, if anything, was just going to add value to our customer base, right? They have a product that sits very nicely alongside ours once integrated. Like you say, the Klaviyo's of the world exist, and many of our customers use them or others already. And so I think it was just it was a nice fit and made a lot of sense. And without going into the details, it also provided a nice seamless exit for myself, which I think was important for me as well.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, it was pretty openly talked about in the press that it was a $60 million plus acquisition. So, half of that obviously, going to your previous investors, and then, the other half sort of going to you and any other major shareholders you had in the platform. So as you say, pretty attractive exit potentially at that time, with a heck of a lot less, I guess, messiness and complexity and potential challenges around maybe going public and doing an IPO and then figuring out, okay, what do we do from here? And do I stay on the board, or do I stay on as president, or what does my role look like? And I guess in that vein, where is Ryan today? Because I know you obviously stayed on with Maropost. There obviously must have been a handover period that was sort of part of the deal, which makes absolute sense. There's no way you can sort of digest a business as big as Neto without having to have that sort of steady hand on the till through that transition process. You've now been with Maropost as a chief business officer for 8 months, but I believe, at least as far as I understand it, you've sort of just about to finish up your tenure with Maropost and sort of get out wholesale altogether. So what did that transition look like, just as in terms of advice for anybody that maybe has a SaaS platform out there that perhaps is looking to get acquired or has been acquired, and sort of feeling their way forward on, how do I take this thing that was my absolute baby and poured my heart and soul into for X number of years, and now it's somebody else's baby, and I want to make sure it sees a continuation of its life, but perhaps in bigger hands or more well-funded hands, or just a new lease on life. What does that look like emotionally to navigate? And then where's Ryan today?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I've actually been involved with Maropost for over a year now, as in the process is obviously run for quite some time. So I think the acquisition was announced in March, but it formally happened, at the end of 2020. And then there was, several months of getting to know each other before that. So I guess my journey with Maropost has been, like I say, for over a year. So we've spent a lot of time together. In fact, I don't think I've ever spent more time with a group of individuals in my life. And it was particularly hard because of the Canadian time zone. As you can imagine, there's just zero crossover in time. So it was lots of 4 a.m. wake ups and, working until the early hours of the morning and then sleeping in the middle of the day. But so that was an experience. I think advice-wise, so the first thing I would say for any founder looking to exit is just make sure that you invest in ensuring that you can have a clean exit. I think a lot of people have earn-out clauses that are very complex and ultimately see them wedded to businesses that are no longer their own for a very long time. And I think that could be very hard for people, especially seeing their business be changed and them losing control. So for me, being able to exit very quickly and cleanly was a big benefit, and another reason why this deal was very much compelling to myself. I would say that in terms of seeing your business being acquired and changed and all that, it's never easy, but it's made a hell of a lot easier when the people acquiring the business and the team that you're working on or with rather on the other side are people that you get along with, that you trust, and that you believe in yourself. And I think investing the time before close to ensure that team is the right group of people that you can trust, get along with, and hand your baby over to would and does make it a lot easier. In terms of where I'm at, like I say, it was about a year journey, you could say, in terms of handover. In terms of them getting to know our business. We had really always set up Neto to sell. In terms of operationally, we had very good processes in place. We're a PCI compliant level 1 provider. We've been audited for the last X number of years. So we had our ducks in a row, and a very strong leadership team, and I think that's also very important. So I guess we made it easy for them to get across our business, to understand our platform, which ultimately made the whole process pretty seamless. Where I'm at, not really sure what I'm going to do yet. Taking a little bit of a break at the moment, advising a couple of startups and speaking to a number of others that look interesting to me, but still undecided, I think, at this stage.
Well, you're in a pretty nice place to consider it in Brizzy. I've got family there. You probably don't know this, but my sister, my brother-in-law, my 2 nephews, and my mom all live in Brizzy, and they absolutely love it there. So, beautiful part of the world. I've spent a fair bit of time in Brizzy visiting them, and it is a beautiful place. And so you're certainly contemplating your future from a pretty spectacular part of the world. Lockdowns across Australia notwithstanding, of course, but and poor Victorians, to say the least. But, what do you make of, if we were to look across, I guess, that sort of tech founder, omnichannel landscape in Australia? We've seen a lot of very public and very large acquisitions of ANZ-based businesses. We've obviously got Afterpay being acquired by Square. We've got Vend recently being acquired by another Canadian company in Lightspeed. We've got Xero being acquired. We've got lots and lots of very, I guess, successful tech startups, fintech startups, etc., that seem to be being acquired at a blistering pace by businesses, particularly international businesses, North American parent companies, etc., that are very, very clearly trying to build out a full omni-channel stack. I mean, obviously, we've got Shopify going hammer and tongs at POS and other elements of the stack to become this commerce operating system. We've got, the likes of BigCommerce doing more partnership-based deals to try to build out their omni-channel stack and ecosystem. We got lots of different approaches internationally, but then we have the Wixes and the Weebly's and the Squarespaces of the world building out commerce functionality on top of their CMSs. The money that I've seen, lots, basically every single week, I'm seeing hundreds of millions of dollars sort of thrown at the omni-channel commerce wall. And I see a lot of these ending badly because there's so much cheap capital sloshing around in the market that I see a lot of bets being made that, by VC, for example, that they know only 1 out of 10 is going to survive, but that one is going to be perhaps a unicorn. And so therefore it makes up on the other 9 worth of losses. But, I see this mad rush towards a full omni-channel stack by almost every provider in the market, combined with just tons of capital flowing towards anything e-commerce related. How do you see this sort of ending up, and how do you think that bodes for particularly ANZ-based product companies that are playing in this space and, they perhaps would initially think about staying private or staying in region, but the opportunities internationally are just too great?
Yeah, well, I mean, firstly, it's a really exciting time for ANZ-based technology companies. I think, and look, I think it's been going for quite some time, but the international players and VC funds and growth equity funds and whatnot, they really do really appreciate what some of these technology companies in Australia are able to achieve in what is a very small market. And I think they also appreciate just how small the market is and how hard it is actually to get something off the ground here. And they take a lot of value in that, and I think that's why we're seeing some exceptionally good outcomes recently. You're right, like a lot of money is being thrown at the wall, and a lot of companies are being acquired, and you do wonder how acquisitions are hard. Bringing together several solutions into a single stack is not simple. It's incredibly difficult, and there's been very, very few that have successfully done it. So, I do have concerns about that in terms of this acquire to grow approach. In terms of how I think it's going to play out, I think we're going to see a lot more consolidation in the industry. I don't think it's all necessarily going to be good for the customer. That's one thing that does concern me. I think it's actually quite unfortunate for a lot of customers that are investing and trusting in these solutions to run their operations that are then being acquired and ultimately dismantled in a way that doesn't benefit the end customer. But if I knew how it was going to end up, if I had a crystal ball, I'd probably be in that game myself, but I don't. I think there's going to be a lot more consolidation. I think that it's going to be I think there's going to be a lot of pain, to be honest, in the next few years. Ultimately, only a few will end up winning, especially with how much money is being pumped into these things. I think ultimately the end result will be good, but there'll be a lot of customers hurt along the way. And that's what I sort of worry about. And it's definitely something that I had at top of mind going through this process myself, in terms of some of the opportunities for us with businesses that could have acquired us.
Yeah, and I guess the cautionary tale there in our industry, particularly down in ANZ, is Bronto, right? Acquired by NetSuite, NetSuite acquired by Oracle, and then Bronto ultimately killed off, and a whole ton of merchants who invested, in some cases tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars in the platform and customization and implementation and deployment and integration with other systems in their stack, all that investment just thrown down the toilet. So, and we've seen some pretty meaty acquisitions with, even the likes of eCommerce acquired by SAP and, some of these other big acquisitions where you do wonder, they obviously play up the value of a full stack, and when you look at the likes of NuOrder and Ecwid being acquired by Lightspeed, to your point, there was a lot of B2B business in particular on NuOrder that are probably scratching their head and going, okay, is NuOrder even going to exist in a future Lightspeed world? Where Lightspeed is obviously their goal is to be the one ring to rule them all. And they're clearly trying to take on the Shopifys of the world by having the pause, by having ecom for B2C in Ecwid and having ecom for B2B with NuOrder, and then trying to bring that under one umbrella. And it does beg the question, will NuOrder and Ecwid as brands even exist in 5 years' time? So I think...
Yeah, and I think those ones are really, just a customer grab, right? Which I think, again, is short-sighted and ultimately not going to benefit the customer, right? And again, like for me, I'm very customer obsessed. I really do everything through a customer lens, and I just don't see that strategy ultimately ending well for the customer and therefore ultimately for the business at the end of the day.
From an investment perspective, obviously you potentially would look to invest in some local ANZ players. What does that look like for you? What interests you in the e-com space in ANZ right now?
Yeah, like I was saying before, I think the back office supply chain side of commerce is definitely of most interest to me. It has always been, but I think now it's really starting to have a light shined on it, and there's a real opportunity for growth in that area. And I know a number of investors are looking to invest in that space, and I think it's largely untapped as well. There's some really big problems to solve. A lot of the problems that need solving are not hard problems to solve, which is exciting, I think. I think for me, it would definitely be something in the back office automation space around the supply chain.
Yeah, and I guess with global supply chains being what they are and being so, strained at the moment, anything that can ease, whether it be 3PL, 4PL services, whether it be logistics integration services, that wider global integration of the obviously Amazon's trying to build that out. We're coming to the end of our time together. What is your take on owned versus sort of unowned channels? And obviously you had a long history of building out integrations with marketplaces, etc. through Neto. You saw that as a key channel mix, being important in terms of channel mix for retailers. How do you see commerce everywhere starting to affect the channel focus and channel mix of major B2B, B2C retailers, particularly as Amazon and in Australia, maybe just in terms of commentary specifically around marketplaces, I see Australia as one of the most marketplaced and perhaps it could be argued over marketplaced countries in the world. You have 10 or 12 top marketplaces in Australia that have massive market share. And then you have many, many more smaller marketplaces with more popping up every day, with large retailers popping up their own marketplaces as well. So we have a scenario in Australia where marketplace dominance is insane and growing seemingly by the day. You know, we had the announcement last week of Barbecues Galore launching their own marketplace. And it literally, I feel like every single week there's a new marketplace being launched in Australia. And it's just not that way in most other countries where you have one large dominant marketplace and maybe a few smaller ones. But how do you see that playing out versus the owned channel of a merchant's e-commerce website themselves in an e-commerce everywhere world?
Yeah, well, I mean, and obviously, if you just look at the Neto platform and our focus, right? For me, it has been about enabling merchants to sell everywhere. And it's my strong belief that merchants should be leveraging all of these channels, including their own channels. I mean, I think, though, for me, it's really about leveraging marketplaces to build your brand. You know, your brand experience is really the value that retailers have. And I don't think enough retailers put enough emphasis on replicating that experience on marketplaces. And I think to be successful on marketplaces, merchants do need to do that, as in they need to work out a way to replicate what they're creating and developing on their own channels through these various marketplaces. Like you say, though, there is an incredible number of marketplaces popping up. And so I think merchants have to pick and choose wisely in terms of, you know, where they are going to be listing their product. And I think it should be largely around whether or not it adds to their brand value or not. But yeah, I'm very much for an agnostic approach. I'm very much for a sell everywhere approach. Of course, that's what the Neto product is all about, and, you know, our technology enabling merchants to do that in as seamless a way as possible.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your amazing insights and your candor, your transparency. You know, I really appreciate it. You know, you've been on an amazing journey. As I said, I've worked with, you know, the Neto team across a few projects now, and the team has always been super helpful, super knowledgeable, super capable. I guess as a final commentary, you know, what I guess did happen to the team? Are they still largely based in Australia and just working for Maropost remotely, or has the team transitioned mostly to being internal at Maropost, or kind of, you know, how did that work out ultimately for most of the people that are continuing to work on Neto?
Yes, the team still exists in Australia, and they're still hiring more people here. So if you're looking for a job in e-commerce, hit them up. There's quite a large number of roles available in the Brisbane office at the moment. So we operate a sort of I guess you could say a hybrid approach. So, you know, people can come into the office if they like, but they can also work fully remotely. And obviously, given the time zones, it is obviously more convenient to work from home often. But yeah, the team still exists, still continues. Is still growing here. There's lots of growth opportunity within the business in this market, and I suspect that will be the way for some time to come. Still, everyone's now employed by Maropost, of course, but it's still the same people on the ground.
That's great to hear, mate. That's great to hear, because they are some amazing people that have helped to build the Neto product and brand over the years. You know, you've done a lot for the industry, so I want to personally thank you for that in terms of your efforts and your team's efforts to move the industry forward in ANZ from an e-commerce perspective. You know, I think you've done a lot. I think you've sacrificed a lot. I think you've given a lot. You know, contributed tremendously, and I personally want to thank you for that, because I think it's, you know, I am very much a believer in a rising tide floats all boats. And I think we wouldn't have the breadth of capability in the e-commerce and omnichannel space in ANZ without people like you, particularly going into COVID. I think we were a hotbed of not only innovation, but adaptation down here, because we are so small and remote compared to other markets in the world. And I think it takes creative people like yourself to keep pushing the industry forward. So thank you for all that you've contributed. And I think we'll be watching you really, really closely moving forward. At least I will, because I'm super interested to see what you jump to next. And I realize, obviously, you want to take some time off and recharge the batteries, which totally makes sense. But look, I think you're a standout in the industry and a total stand-up guy. So really looking forward with excitement to what you decide to pick up tools on next.
Thanks, Jason. I really appreciate it, and also obviously appreciate everything you do for the industry. It's awesome.
Absolutely. All right, mate. Well, look, maybe we can pick this discussion back up and again in another 6 or 12 months, see sort of where you land and what you decide to do next. And maybe you can come on and talk about it with us. And with me, I'd really enjoy that.
Yeah, I'd appreciate it. And I'll hit you up if I'm over in New Zealand.
Look forward to it, mate. Speak again soon. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the At the Coalface podcast. If you want more At the Coalface, you can subscribe to our premium e-commerce and digital newsletter, At the Coalface Digest.